Number 7 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on International Trade. Welcome to all our witnesses. Our apologies for the delay. You know how those things are when you're dealing with Ottawa in the House of Commons. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order November 24th, 2021. The Board of Internal Economy requires that committees adhere to the following health protocols. Anyone with symptoms should participate by Zoom and not attend in person. Masks must be worn in committee room by everyone in the committee room, except when members are at their place during parliamentary proceedings. However, it's strongly recommended that members wear their mask even when they are at their place during parliamentary proceedings. So just a reminder for staff to have their masks on for the 2 hours of this meeting, please. All those inside the committee room should follow best practices of maintaining a physical distance of at least 2 meters from others and maintain proper hygiene. As the chair, I will be responsible for enforcing these measures, so thank you for your cooperation. A few rules I have to outline. You may speak in the official language of your choice. At the bottom of your screen, you have the choice of either floor, English, or French. If there's a problem with the interpretation, please let us know and we will halt the proceedings and correct it. The raise hand features on the main toolbar should you wish to speak. When speaking, please speak slowly. And when you are not speaking, your microphone should be on mute. A reminder, all comments should be addressed through the chair, and the committee clerk and I will be maintaining a speaking list. So this is the study on the modernization of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement pursuant to the Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, January 31st. The committee is resuming its study on the modernization of Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. With us today by video conference as individuals are Roman Washek, Business Ombudsman in Ukraine, Michael Roche, Professor, University de Quebec and Chicoutimi, Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce, Zenin Potinkny, President, and from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, Mr. Macmillan, President and Chief Executive Officer, and from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, we have Ihor Alchenik, Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer. My apologies for not pronouncing those names as wonderfully as Mr. Baker did earlier. Welcome to all of you. We will start with 5 minutes of opening remarks, after which we will proceed with a round of questions. Mr. Washik, I invite you to take the opening statement for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. An honor to be here. In my current capacity as a business ombudsman, but also hearkening back to my time as Canadian ambassador to Ukraine at the time the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement was both signed and implemented. It was designed primarily to give, of course, our commercial relations a boost. And if anything, in terms of its negotiation, was designed to help open up the Canadian market to Ukrainian products, as well as promote Canadian exports. We made a special effort on the part of our development program at the time to launch a project called the Canada-Ukraine Trade and Investment Support Project, with which Mr. Potichny's Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce was associated and led primarily by the Conference Board of Canada, to also support Ukrainians who were suffering both from continuing warfare, which we now see is possibly surging again, but also from the problems of a transitional economy that still has not worked all the kinks. We have seen growth in bilateral trade, but also bumps on the road, and I think the pandemic was certainly inhibiting progress in 2020, and then with some rebound in 2021. In looking at the opportunities that modernizing this agreement might bring, certainly in time as ambassador, and now looking around, at the Ukrainian economy, whose issues I am helping to resolve as business ombudsman, you definitely see a thriving IT sector here in Ukraine, which Canadian companies have been very active in tapping into. Now, you might think this would be to the net, would be problematic for the Canadian IT market or labor market. From what I've seen, however, it tends to be a net growing of the pie. I think, as a former U.S. president might put it, make the pie higher. In that digitalization of companies like Canadian Tire, which was driven in part by innovations developed for them in Ukraine, actually helped them increase the number of IT people employed both in Canada and in Ukraine, just by making the company more digital. So I think there's considerable scope in the information technology services sector. And there's another area where certainly Canadians have made considerable progress in Ukraine. That is in the insurance sector. Fairfax Financial of Canada now owns 3 insurance companies in Ukraine. It's the largest single player in the Ukrainian insurance space. Their companies write about $150 million worth of policies annually. And so having a framework in which both rules, ground rules for investment and rules for provision of services by companies based in either Canada or Ukraine are more securely defined would, I think, help expand that sort of engagement on both sides of this trading, investment, and services relationship. I won't belabor these points anymore and leave it over to you to ask some questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Roger, please.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'd like to thank you for the invitation. What I'd like to present to you today on the subject of the modernization of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, or CIIT, involves the broader issue of the context in which this is taking place. Because you can't separate out trade issues from geopolitical and social issues. My analysis is based on the premise that free trade is theoretically supposed to be mutually beneficial for the parties involved, and that hoped-for gains are not thwarted by any policies which would be unfavorable to one of the parties. However, one of the elements of the current context involves relations between Canada and Russia on the one hand, and between the Ukraine and Russia on the other. On the Government of Canada website, where the issue of modernization of CIIT is discussed, it says that it would also contribute to strengthening the international rules-based system by promoting fair, inclusive, and transparent trade with Ukraine, and will support prospects for long-term security, stability, and economic development in Ukraine. It's a well-known fact that international trade contributes to stability, and that stability is one of the conditions for open international trade. If we're trying to support the outlook for security and stability in Ukraine in the long term, we have to go beyond a simple lifting of tariff barriers. Up until now, CIIT has not led to any success. In 2016, before the free trade agreement was signed with Ukraine, trade between the two countries was greater than it has been ever since the agreement has been in force, except in 2017. And in 2017, the agreement only came into effect on August the 1st. One of the major reasons is because of the political and geopolitical difficulties that Ukraine has been experiencing. This country is being used as a mere pawn in the superpowers' chess game. Ukraine feels threatened by Russia, and Russia also feels targeted by the past and future expansion of NATO. As security can only be mutual, true negotiations should be undertaken to review the security architecture in Europe. An agreement including all parties would end Moscow's instrumentalization of pro-Russian separatists in Donbass, would reassure Russian authorities, and would greatly strengthen the sense of security in Ukraine. All of this would have positive impacts for investment and trade. But for the time being, Canada's position with respect to the current conflict involving Ukraine is counterproductive. Refusing to recognize at least some of Russia's grievances blocks any real progress in negotiations. The potential imposition of additional sanctions on Russia will have a negative impact on all countries involved, beginning with Ukraine itself, whose trade with its most powerful neighbor is roughly 50 times greater than its trade with Canada. We must also add a more dangerous long-term element for global security. Russia's increasing isolation is leading it to be more and more closely associated with China's orbit, and China is dissatisfied with current world order and aspires to hegemony. It's a well-known fact that periods of transition between two hegemonies are periods that are likely to have tension and are not favorable to the kind of collaboration necessary to maintain the collective good that most influential countries in the international system have been able to provide. History has demonstrated this with the decline of Great Britain towards the end of the 19th century and during the multipolar period following World War I. In the current context, is it wise to let Russia go further away? Is Ukraine really going to be able to benefit from such a situation? In conclusion, I feel it's necessary that any reflection about revising and modernizing CIIT takes into consideration the broader parameters that I've just discussed. Thank you.
Mr. Potinkny.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In these very difficult days for Ukraine, with massive Russian army on the Ukrainian borders, we stand together with Ukraine and must say no to Putin. I'm sorry, Mr. Michael, but I don't quite agree with some of the things you mentioned, but we're not going to get into the politics today. Over the past 30 years, the government of Canada has been continually providing extensive guidance and support for the government of Ukraine in its efforts to establish a stable economic environment. One of the most mutually beneficial examples of this is the CAFTA, Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. Since it came into force on August 1st, 2017, CAFTA has laid new foundations for trade, growth, and investment in both countries. That being said, CAFTA is still work in progress with opportunities for improvement. Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce conducted some of the consultations with our partners, members, and stakeholders. And here are some of the points of our discussion and interest. Number one, cross-border trade in consulting, financial, and ICT services. Ukraine is a great destination for outsourcing of consulting, financial, and IT services. Experienced and educated labor force of Ukraine has encouraged global corporations to locate their shared service centers in Kyiv, Lviv, and other cities. Ukraine is now the fourth largest supplier of tech talent to the world. Ukraine is becoming increasingly popular among those looking for IT outsourcing partners. Since 2017, the IT sectors in Ukraine has grown approximately 27 to 30% year over year, with over 285,000 IT specialists currently working in the industry, with about $6.8 billion worth of services in export. We currently see a rise in interest from Canadian ICT firms in outsourcing to Ukraine, as well as looking into opening their offices in the country due to the newly adopted law on digital economy facilitation with highly attractive tax and regulatory conditions. GDPR law is underway to its adoption. All this will make Ukraine highly competitive on a global market, and Canadian companies will benefit from it. On the other hand, big Ukrainian service companies are also opening their offices in Canada to benefit from being located in the same time zone most of their customers are, and better provide service. Hence, it's an additional job for Canadian economy. Investment. Canadian corporations and investment funds are sophisticated investors. During the last few years, we witnessed quite substantial investments in the Ukrainian markets made by such companies, and Mr. Vashchuk mentioned Fairfax, Brookfield, and others. As an important role in decision-making on the implementation of international projects by Canadian investors is played by the Federal Corporation Export Development Canada, EDC, which provides credit and government guarantees for the implementation of the project. In 2014, Ukraine's EDC rating significantly deteriorated, which led to reduced interest of Canadian business to invest in Ukraine. In 2017, Ukraine's rating was slightly improved, but it remains undesirable and does not correspond to the realities of business and investment climate in Ukraine. We would ask the committee to consider the need to reevaluate the current EDC rating on Ukraine. Non-trade barriers. We constantly hear of Canadian exporters facing challenges while dealing with Ukrainian customs, and probably it is time to consider implementing some improvements. Beyond tariffs, there are many other chapters and provisions on such elements as non-tariff barriers that will help to ensure that the market access that we gain through lowering or eliminating tariffs, on one hand, is not taken away by some other means of circumstances. CAFTA should focus on eliminating the red tape that companies face at the border by establishing customs procedures that are as standardized, as simple, as predictable, and as modern as they can be. We suggest that digital transformation with a paperless environment and ability to advance ruling for a given product even before it reaches the border would be very helpful. A perfect example of such an issue is the certificate of origin, which in many cases gets questioned once the product travels from Canada through another country to Ukraine. Another example of such non-tariff barrier is the treatment of Ukrainian alcohol beverages imports into or exports to Canada by Canadian company. The export tariff on these beverages were removed, but in case of one of our members, the Ontario Ministry of Finance through the LCBO has levied unfairly high cost of service differential, COSD.
I'm sorry,
Much
sir,
lower.
I have to interrupt. If you could just close your remarks so that the members can ask the questions, please.
All right. I would just like to say here that much lower cost charges are being applied to EU spirits because of provision of the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. Also the same with Canada, US, Mexico, they're much lower. Therefore, we're asking to please ensure that similar provisions are included in the text of the expanded and modernized CAFTA.
Thank you very much.
On the immigration,
I'm sorry, sir. You're over time. I know it's difficult. Mr. McMillan, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members for including CAP in this important discussion. Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, we produce about 80% of Canada's oil and gas. We're proud to be one of Canada's largest employers, Canada's largest private sector investor, and pertinent to this committee, oil and gas make up Canada's largest export. Consistent with the last couple of speakers, I will keep my comments to energy trade and to the larger dynamics that are currently making trade with the Ukraine challenging, and some of the dynamics that are driving that in Europe and in the Ukraine. So just a quick background, the Ukraine lost about 80% of its oil and gas potential when Russia annexed the Crimea in 2014. According to the International Energy Agency, the Ukraine has one of the most energy-intensive economies in Europe. They have worked very hard over the last decade to become more self-sufficient with gas. And today they produce about 70% of their natural gas domestically and need to import the other 30. Like the rest of Europe, their energy needs and their gas needs make them heavily reliant on Russia. And back in 2016, just for reference, Russia, in the midst of a dispute, cut off gas supplies to the Ukraine for a day. And the devastating effects of energy insecurity, I think, are something that no country should have to live with. When I look at the primary energy demand in the Ukraine, natural gas makes up about a third of all of the energy they use. Coal, 30%, nuclear, 20%, and petroleum, gasoline, and diesel fuel, about 18%. The Ukraine has worked to get what they call a flow back mechanism to get some gas coming back out of Europe into the Ukraine so that they aren't solely dependent on imports from Russia. A quick reflection on the realities of energy in Europe, that over the last several years, Europe has become increasingly dependent on Russia and on imports. That globally, and maybe I'll start globally, global demand over the last several decades have seen dramatic increases in the demand for oil and gas. This has been a very positive impact in the world's poorest nations, meaning better diets, warm houses in winter, and more freedom of movement. And the International Energy Agency predicts an increase in global demand by about 30% out to the end of their forecast at 2040. For Europe, they have made some energy policy choices that I think have made them very vulnerable, and I'll go over them right now. And I think those vulnerabilities have a direct impact on their ability to play a relevant role in the current conflict that seems to be amassing in the Ukraine. That Europe has taken policy decisions. They've seen production of their domestic natural gas fall off dramatically. The North Sea and Norway have both seen declines, substantial declines in the last several decades. And though the onshore resource is substantial in many parts of Europe and the United Kingdom, they have put policies in place that have made it very difficult for them to develop it. And as I mentioned earlier, that it is life-changing when the world's poorest nations get access to energy, oil, gas, coal, nuclear, wind, and solar for the first time. It is truly phenomenally beneficial. It is also devastating, expensive, and dangerous when the world's wealthiest nations lose access to reliable energy. And the policy decisions that Europe has made in recent years has left them extremely vulnerable. They have shut down their nuclear facilities in several countries, or are in the process of doing so. They have shut down several coal-fired power plants. They have limited their ability to develop their resources for oil and gas, and they have become more reliant on imports from the Middle East, from Russia, and from Africa. They have also built out some infrastructure for LNG, and that is, I think, a bit of a lifeline today as they are facing some very high prices and insecurity coming out of Russia. This insecurity has left Europe in a very vulnerable position where they seem to be unwilling to take a strong stand and being more secure in their energy supplies, I think, would enable them to take more principled stances. Europe has gone
in closing, Mr. McMillan, I'm sorry, your time is almost up. If you want a closing statement.
Sure. I think that I would just thank the committee for including energy in this discussion. It is fundamental to the dynamics that we're currently seeing play out in Europe and around the world. And that Canada has an opportunity to build LNG facilities to be a reliable partner for our allies and our friends around the world, including in Europe and in the Ukraine. But it's going to take policy change here in Canada for us to play that very important role.
Thank you very
Madam Chair.
much. On to Mr. McElchin for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, to this committee. Just a reminder for everyone that when referring to Ukraine, we don't need to use the article "the," which would imply a region, but Ukraine is actually a sovereign state, as we're learning in these times of conflict and Russian escalation of aggression. So I'm here on behalf of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, which is the voice of Canada's Ukrainian community. We bring together under one umbrella the national, provincial, and local Ukrainian community organizations and represent the interests of the community in Canada, which at the last census was at 1.4 million Canadians. Our organization has worked since 1940, and we work in the spheres of social, economic, and political affairs. Before I speak to our recommendations on this important topic of CUFTA modernization, I do want to touch upon the fact that Ukraine is a country at war, a country which is a target of foreign aggressions for the past 8 years, and it has defended itself from Russia's attempts to once again subjugate the Ukrainian people through the use of force. Today, Russia is threatening a further invasion of Ukraine, a serious escalation which is having deleterious effects on Ukraine's economy. The instability caused by Russia's escalation in recent weeks is causing private investors to flee and making it far more expensive for Ukraine to raise capital on lending markets. We welcome the announcement by Canada in recent days of loan commitments to Ukraine totaling $620 million and the intention of the G7 to support economic stabilization. However, it's also important to remember that we need to raise the cost for Russia of further escalation of aggression. The UCC calls on this committee and its members to support the implementation of further sanctions against Russia as a proactive deterrent rather than following a potential Russian invasion. Sectoral sanctions on the energy and financial sectors of Russia need to be strengthened immediately. These should be sanctions against Russian officials, particularly wealthy businessmen or oligarchs close to the Russian regime, and they should be sent now as a deterrent. Turning to the issue at hand, to the longer-term modernization of Canada-Ukraine free trade agreements, the government of Ukraine has made the attraction of foreign direct investment in Ukraine a policy priority. The increase of trade and economic activity between Canada and Ukraine will serve to further facilitate Ukraine's transition to a market economy and the supremacy of rule of law and democratic governance. Ukraine is a key international partner for Canada and an emerging market for Canadian investments in the heart of Europe. Increased prosperity resulting from Canadian investments in Ukraine will create a virtuous circle of increased investment of the Ukrainian business community in Canada, creating jobs and prosperity here. We have 5 recommendations for the Committee on the Modernization of CUFTA. First, to focus on increasing trade collaboration and investment between Canada and Ukraine in the IT, green energy, defense, and aerospace sectors, which have the strongest potential for growth. Next, to establish reform benchmarks in law enforcement, judicial and taxation systems, and clear criteria for measuring reform progress. Third, to focus on demonopolization of Ukraine's economy, including market competition reform benchmarks with Ukraine's Anti-Monopoly Committee. Fourth, to work to revise Export Development Canada's risk rating criteria of Ukraine and ensure that EDC makes all of its products and services available to Canadian businesses investing in Ukraine. Finally, we ask for a focus on enhancing the people-to-people ties by developing a comprehensive roadmap for the liberalization of travel for Ukrainian citizens to Canada, including establishment of visa-free travel for short-term visits. The relationship between Canada and Ukraine is a strong one, not only because of the people ties, it's strong because our countries share the same values and commitment to democracy, equality, and liberty. We believe the modernization of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement will strengthen these ties to the benefit of both countries and both peoples. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. On to the committee. Mr. Patzer for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to start with Mr. McMillan. How important is energy security to a country like the Ukraine?
Thank you for the question. I think Ukraine, like any country, it's fundamental. It is the basis of modern life, that it heats our homes, it provides the food that we eat, it's the fertilizer for our crops. Ukraine has worked very hard over the last decade to become more self-sufficient. But the insecurity that the current political situation is leaving on them leaves them very vulnerable, and it leaves their allies very vulnerable at the same time.
Can Canada help? Like, do we have, say, resources or things that could help out with the Ukraine?
Absolutely, we have world-class energy resources. What we lack is infrastructure. And I am sad to say that over the last decade, we have had several large infrastructure projects on our East Coast, some that were directly linked to European utilities that needed federal and provincial approvals. None of those have got their approvals. None of them got final investment decisions. Some of our competitors and friends around the world have developed substantial LNG infrastructure. The U.S. has surpassed us, and I believe they have 15 that are currently operating or in construction. Canada has 0 that today could send natural gas to Europe.
What was the biggest hurdle in reaching final approval or preventing them from reaching final approval?
It's not the resource, because ours is world-class and cost-effective. It is a Canadian regulatory process that is not as transparent as we would expect a democracy like Canada to have. It changed a few years ago with Bill C-69 that made that more difficult. And I think large global investors look at Canada today as a place that is very difficult to get major infrastructure built, energy infrastructure or otherwise.
Thank you. Mr. Potosny, just wondering, where are we at right now for trading agricultural products to the Ukraine under the current agreement?
Well, actually, Ukraine is, as you know, is one of the major producers of agricultural products in the world. And there, if you look at the different products, the top 3 in the world in many cases. So Ukraine is a major exporter to the world. Between Canada and Ukraine, I don't think there's a huge agricultural trade, but there's quite a bit of, for example, fruits trade. If you drink any of the apple juice in Canada, you are most likely drinking apple juice made from apples from Ukraine, because that's a number 1 exporter of apples is Ukraine to Canada. Definitely, EDC again is a key in this area. I know there are companies from Manitoba, Alberta that are trying to export not the product itself, but the equipment to Ukraine, and they have done it before with assistance from EDC. However, EDC has cut off quite a bit of business and look at Ukraine only on a very much case-by-case basis. So EDC is a very important player in here.
Okay, thank you for that. And I kind of just building off of that framework, and I asked this question to departmental officials, and I'd like to kind of get your perspective on this. What about the certification process for manufacturers, right? That's one of the requests from manufacturers that I have in my riding who I know are exporting agricultural equipment to the Ukraine. They're looking for some certainty on, the certification required. So just wondering if you have any comments on that.
Well, certainly, if we're looking at certification in Ukraine of Canadian equipment, I know myself because I am also in energy and oil and gas business in Ukraine, and we tried to bring a Canadian-made rig into Ukraine. The process of getting it certified and approved was just incredible. It was impossible. But Ukraine has really moved a lot into the area of definitely changing and improving the certification process. It still has some issues here and there, but it's definitely different than what it used to be. And what I said before, in moving a lot of this bureaucratic paperwork into digital form, where you don't have bureaucrats along the way trying to make some money and take some bribes. If we can move it into that system, that way we can improve that very quickly and very nicely. And Ukraine is moving in the digital world very quickly. If you look at what they have already digitized in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Mr. Varani, please, for 5 minutes.
I believe it's 6 minutes, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, we started a half an hour late.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, got it. Okay, great. So I'll go a bit quicker. So first of all, welcome. It's great to see so many familiar faces. And, the last time that we were in session at this committee, we were interrupted by an announcement of additional money for financing in Ukraine, $500 million, but also $7.8 million for weapons and armaments. I can't promise the same will occur during the middle of this meeting, but who knows? Stay tuned. But I do think it's important to just underscore that kind of support, whether it's renewing Op Unifier, whether it's the $620 million thus far that Ihor had mentioned, whether it is the lethal armaments that have been supplied, whether it's humanitarian aid, because I think that demonstrates the commitment, and you've got a lot of strong advocates among all sides of the House for Ukraine. And very politely and respectfully, in terms of some of the comments you made, I'll agree to disagree with you. I think the entire approach towards Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement 2.0 is about further liberalizing trade with a Western nation such as Canada and really helping Ukraine embrace the free market economy. And I think that's just something prima facie that Vladimir Putin's not going to be happy with, but so be it, would be my simple response. Roman Waschuk, I want to put a question to you because, first of all, as former ambassador, I appreciate your service. It's nice to see you again, sir. I appreciated your hospitality when I was able to visit Ukraine in 2018, but I appreciated not just the fact that you were there on our behalf as an ambassador, but also some of the things you were instrumental in terms of opening my eyes about, and that was about the omnipresent security and territorial threat of Russian aggression, which I saw in terms of observing the troops on the Maidan and when you helped me tour the Maidan, but also how you explained to me that there are economic levers that we can use to our advantage to further close that gap between our two countries. And I remember intense discussions about the film and TV industry because I was there at the time in my role as Parliamentary Secretary at the Ministry of Heritage. Can you comment on things such as the film and TV industry, co-production agreements, or other avenues of economic linkages that you see that we can embrace via this renegotiation of the agreement? So over to you, former Ambassador Waschuk.
Yes, indeed. I would note that we have, in fact, signed a co-production agreement. So we have the respective taxation and content regulation regimes in place. We've naturally not been able to fully utilize it. The pandemic put a bit of a damper on people traveling back and forth to engage in international co-productions. Certainly, we will have increased scope to work that out now. I would also flag that Canada-Ukraine trade, for example, in 2021, is highly balanced. Both countries were exporting about $225 million worth of goods both ways. And maybe flagging again a point that Professor Roche was claiming, in other words, that the agreement has been entirely ineffective, that in fact Ukrainian trade to Ukrainian exports to Canada have doubled since 2017. Between 2017 and 2021, which was one of the policy goals of Canada in helping Ukraine in its diversification of trade internationally. So that goal has certainly been achieved. But we, I think, through services, audiovisual being one of them, can make it better.
Thank you, Mr. Waschuk. I just wanted to put a question to Ihor as well, because you mentioned some of the economic levers and you listed sort of 5 different sort of recommendations, and I thank you for them. I wanted to focus in on one of them where you talked about sort of in terms of sort of our trade and investment. You mentioned IT, and I know that telecoms is up for review, and I know that cybersecurity is also an area that is a burgeoning threat for in terms of Russian aggression from with respect to what's going on with Ukraine's integrity and sovereignty right now. Can you unpack some of the linkages there that might be formed between the cybersecurity assistance and telecoms investment? So over to you, Ihor.
Well, I'm not an expert on cybersecurity, but I think as our previous witnesses have said, IT is the growth industry. I think, even today and yesterday we saw Ukraine, I think the Ministry of Defense, major banks and others have been hit with intense cyber attacks. So Ukraine has certainly become expert in dealing with I don't know who would be attacking Ukraine by cyber at this time, but whatever country it might be, Ukraine has become an expert in dealing with them. And so, we know that Canada has the deficit of IT specialists, as was mentioned, that there's a natural linkage there. So I think that, there's certainly other aspects, artificial intelligence, financial technologies, analytics, but I think just by virtue of the geopolitical context, Ukraine is quickly becoming an expert in dealing with major cybersecurity threats.
Thank you very much, sir. On to Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome. I have a question for Mr. Roche. Very happy to see you again. We have met, and you're still professor at the University of Quebec in Chicoutimi, and we're happy to have high-quality experts from this region of the world in our universities in Quebec. I've already been one of your courses. I actually gave one of your courses when you were on sabbatical. And we're talking about political economy and international relations now. Would you say that we could sum it up by saying that the Canadian position is in alignment of that with the U.S.? Well, in part, it's aligned with U.S. foreign policy. That's a fact. And that's also true for Great Britain. Because we've seen that there are nuances between the various countries who are members of NATO in terms of their positioning with respect to this conflict. Germany and France are much more nuanced. But I still maintain that there are very Canadian reasons which would explain the foreign affairs positioning. So would you agree that Canada's attitude is one of the most radical when it comes to Russia? I would say that in the current context, Canada is clearly the country whose attitude is the most intransigent when it comes to Russia's demands. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm always on the side of the people. I'm on the side of the Ukrainian people. I do not like any sovereign people or even non-sovereign people I don't like to see them instrumentalized for foreign policy purposes. So from this point of view, the Ukrainian people has all of my sympathies. But we have to make sure that we can still see the forest for the trees. When you look at things from a purely regional perspective, there are certain things that slip away. And we don't see some of the major processes which are actually transforming current international society. Thank you, Mr. Rush. I think we understood your position that you don't have any disdain for the Ukrainian people at all, but that you're talking about Russia and how it could harm Canada's interests by bringing Russia closer to China.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, just a reminder that it's trade is the focus of our study that we're focusing on.
Yes, of course. This is why I was getting to that. There was some issue of hydrocarbons in a previous statement, and I would like to ask Mr. Roche, how do you explain this position with respect to oil and gas? Well, I think that one of the previous speakers has already explained this, at least partially. You talk about trade when you talk about security. You can't separate them artificially. So what you can say about this is that in the case of trade relations between Canada and Ukraine, there is an energy component. The energy dimension applies to people who want to sell gas. So the Russians with Gazprom want to sell gas. Canadian corporations want to sell gas. So that's legitimate for trade issues. But this is also part of strategic considerations. There's a reason why Germany and France and Netherlands and others who import a lot of natural gas from Russia, well, all of this contributes to strengthening Russia. One of the main levers for Russian diplomacy is, in fact, its gas. And what's somewhat disturbing is that even if there are legitimate reasons, there is an attempt to benefit from the current context by increasing the conflict's intensity and find an excuse to end the Nord Stream 2 project. And if this were to happen, Canada and the U.S. would be prepared to take up the slack to replace these Russian exports, which would no longer be happening. So even if this might be commercially legitimate, this contributes to provoking a Russian reaction.
Time is well in excess of Mr. Tremblay's time. Mr. Massey for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Presidente, et merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start with Mr. Waschuk, but I'll leave this open for other witnesses to chime in after if they're interested. One of the things I've always had a great interest in is cybersecurity and fraud prevention. In fact, we did a first ever one at Industry Committee last session. And I'm just wondering, what could we do better to improve our telecommunications trade and digital economy for not only just the financial sector, but also to other components in the trading venue that would actually enhance that type of a operation. I think Canada has a lot to offer in those elements, and I'd like to see encouragement going that direction, because I mentioned last session I've had Ukrainian interns for 12 of my 20 years here in the House, and they've been phenomenal of being ahead of the curve, and most of them are actually in those fields right now after they go through the program. So I'd like to hear and start with Mr. Waschuk, and then if anybody else wants to chime in, I'd be happy to hear that too about that, because I find that really unique, and it's just been really special from what I've experienced.
Certainly. Well, the Ukrainians have been in a sort of lemons to lemonade mode here. A number of them have taken their frontline experience in this tech struggle and turned them into successful cybersecurity companies. Similarly, they are very much interested in solutions that Canadian companies may offer. There are broader interests as well in the defense field. I think it is probably not a coincidence that our leading export in 2021 was optical equipment, given that Ukrainians are literally looking through at what is facing them from the other side of the border. So I think there is considerable scope, not just for simple back and forth, but on joint development and on creating teams that can crack innovation issues and move things forward for companies both in Canada and in Ukraine. I think companies that have done that have certainly succeeded very well in the Canadian market.
Yeah, and I'll turn it over to if anybody else is interested, because I don't want to get into the deep things of the military stuff, but the reality is when you look back in history, military has often led to a lot of civilian and peaceful progress in technology. I'm close here to the American border. They look at the American Civil War, and despite there was a lot of advancements for medicines and a whole series of different things just out of necessity. So, at any rate, that's where I see some excitement about where we can cross-pollinate some of our businesses to be very successful. Is there anyone else that'd like to comment on this sector?
If I maybe can just jump in for a second.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Cybersecurity in Ukraine is a great business, great talent. But I think we as Canadians have to be a little bit more aggressive and cooperate with them more closely. I mean, we as Chamber of Commerce try to do that. We bring them into the trade missions for these cybersecurity conferences and stuff, and I see how Americans quickly snatch them and take them away. Americans are basically taking them from under our knows. So us Canadians, a bit being too conservative and too nice, are losing that huge cooperation chance with Ukrainians. Ukrainians love Canadians. They want to cooperate, but we have to be a little bit more aggressive. Thank you.
That's a good point about that we face too, is our startups, and then they get the medium sized and they're gobbled up, and some are actually gobbled up to stop competition. So it's actually something that we face quite a bit over here. So I think I'm out of my time, Madam Chair. Do I have any time left?
56 seconds.
Okay, just a real quick one. Back to Mr. Weschuk, and I'm sorry, I don't want to miss any other, but I've only got 60 seconds. In terms of border security and operations and processing for exports, imports, is there things that we can get with regards to sharing our government resources and expertise? Like for that, a good example is Canada has detector dog programs that are amongst the best. They actually make the goods and services flow better. Is there something we can do there as well too to make sure that our trade actually grows?
A brief answer, please.
Right. I think working under an enhanced chapter on processing, border security, customs cooperation, that would certainly be very helpful.
Much on to Mr. Martel for 4 minutes.
4 minutes? Okay.
Yes.
Ma question
My question is for Mr. McMillan. Mr. McMillan, if I've understood correctly, if we're exporting LNG to our allies in Europe, that would probably change the geopolitical dynamics, and it would make our allies less dependent on Russia. I'd like to know what you think. How far do you think Canada can go to meet European demand?
There has been multiple LNG facilities proposed for our East Coast. Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Quebec have all had projects. The limit is not on the resource. Canada has hundreds of years of supply that is safely available and developable. The infrastructure is really the only limiting factor. That if we could have the access, we have the resource to supply really, I don't want to say endless, but more natural gas than we certainly use here in Canada.
Monsieur McMillan, le Canada.
Mr. McMillan, Canada has an agreement with Germany and has had one since the spring to supply more LNG. We could do the same thing with other countries, including Ukraine. So I often wonder, how is it that when we refuse projects for LNG here in Quebec, such as, for example, the Quebec LNG project, which would have been the cleanest in the world?
Yeah, no, it most certainly would have been. It would have been, the compression would have been done with hydropower. The carbon footprint of that facility and the natural gas flowing through it would be almost, it would be infinitesimal compared to the natural gas coming out of Russia or coming out of the Middle East or out of North Africa. But the political environment in Canada, or the regulatory environment in Canada, did not allow that project to get through the BAP process.
Monsieur McMillan, encore une fois, parce que
Another question for you, Mr. McMillan, and this is something that's very interested and, of course, involves my riding. I'd like you to enlighten me, please, on the difference between Russian gas and Canadian gas. What are the benefits of the Canadian product, and why do you think it would be more beneficial for Europe to have our gas?
Yeah, great question. Canadian producers are world class, even compared to our friends and neighbors to the south. Canada has extremely rigorous regulations around methane emissions. We have venting and flaring regulations that are second to none. The carbon footprint of a Canadian gigajoule of gas is better than any gas coming out of Russia or Middle East or the United States, for that matter.
Merci, Monsieur McMillan. J'ai encore du temps?
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Do I have any time left? I have another minute. Mr. Roche, I was happy to see someone from my region as a witness. I have a question for you. On Radio-Canada, in an interview, you said that you thought there would be a diplomatic resolution to the conflict rather than a military one. Today, do you still think that's the case?
Mais oui, c'est toujours.
Yes, it's still the case. Contrary as to what's often said, it's not in Russia's interest to take over Ukraine. Its current interest is to pressure NATO by, unfortunately, using Ukraine. However, internal conditions in Russia do not make how could I say this? It wouldn't make it a cost-effective to occupy a 40 million person country where most of the population would be hostile to it.
Sorry to cut you off. On to Mr. Baker, please, for 4 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair, and hello and dobry den to our witnesses, dobry večer to Mr. Vasyuk and Kyiv. I don't have a lot of time, so I'll be very, very brief, and I'll ask you to answer my questions as concisely as you possibly can. Before I go on, I will say I'm with Mr. Varani. I don't expect another announcement of lethal aid to Ukraine during our meeting today, but I will say, and I'll thank all members of the committee on all sides of the House, we just passed a unanimous motion that I requested unanimous consent for in the Parliament, in Canada's Parliament, standing firm in support of Ukraine's sovereignty, condemning the Russian Duma's vote, recognizing the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, and calling on the international community to stand together in any opposition to further aggression and to continue to support Ukraine. So that is some good news as well. I do want to go to you, Mr. Vasyuk, if I may. You spoke about the opportunities in provision of services, but you talked about the need for ground rules in the provision of services, that would help and expand that sort of opportunity. Could you briefly describe what do you mean by those ground rules? What specific ground rules would you recommend?
Well, I'm now in the business of helping to enforce ground rules by holding Ukrainian officials to account through the Business Ombudsman Office when they, for example, willfully misinterpret regulations. I think we, for example, have seen significant improvement in the regulation of the insurance market, which has moved from a weak national regulator to the national bank. That's been good news for Fairfax and its 3 companies here in this market. So I think helping Ukraine move in those directions that create more predictability, and also continuing to press for improvements in the judicial system and rule of law, because people who own a company one day want to make sure that they're still owning it the next, and that they can get a fair hearing in court. We supported judicial reform. I think it was the UCC that mentioned that adding some elements of conditionality there would probably be helpful as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And Mr. Potichny, thank you for being with us here today. And you spoke about, you gave us a number of recommendations, which I'm sure we'll consider in our report. You spoke about EDC, you spoke about the opportunities available. But I'd just like to ask you, as we prepare our report, is there any specific additional advice that you would give to us as MPs on this committee that you believe the government should include as it's negotiating the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement? What would you like to see tangibly more in the CUFTA agreement going forward, if possible?
Well, I guess some of the points that I presented, those were sort of the points that our members and our partners have talked about. But I mean, maybe a couple of things I didn't have chance to throw in. One of them is a sort of immigration regulation for Canadian citizens, because I don't know if you know, but if you are traveling to Ukraine and maximum you can stay is 90 days out of 180, then you have to go through a huge process of documents and approving it. Otherwise, you get penalized. So if Canada can also do something like the European Union does, where they allow Canadian business individuals and their household members to stay in EU for up to 3 years on a special permit, which is easy to obtain. So if we can just repeat the same thing what Canada does in Europe with Ukraine for the Canadians. On the other side, obviously, as you know, everyone on the Ukrainian side keeps on asking about the visa-free travel for Ukrainians. And that would certainly, and I know everybody says not yet, but just looking at the business side of things, if you can have a free movement of even business people for these trade shows, for these business meetings, for these business to government meetings, I'm 100% sure we can increase the flow of deals made, the flow of deals signed, and the increase of the trade and investment. Right now, it's very, very complicated, very difficult to get visas for Ukrainian people, and including normal, regular business people. So I would see these couple of things maybe
Thank you very,
another part.
thank you very much,
Thank you.
sir. On
Thank
to
you,
Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2 minutes, please.
2 minutes, ça va aller vite. Parfait. Merci, Madame la...
That's going to be fine. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Rush, let's continue about the oil issue. Your colleague, oil and gas, your colleague, Mr. Martel, asked a different witness an issue about operating our own oil in a competitive advantage situation with competition with Russia, trade with Ukraine, trade with Europe. The question was, would it be better for us to use our LNG? And it seems that your position isn't quite the same. What's your position on the subject? Well, of course, I had to look at the whole issue of the use of natural gas. I was a witness on, as part of the commission that was looking into the Quebec LNG project at the BAP. And what I thought I understood was that from an environmental point of view, there's no possible comparison between Russian gas and Canadian gas. Contrary to what your colleague stated just before, that's completely incorrect to say that LNG from the Saguenay, unfortunately, part of the sound remote was. This comes from the tar sands of the oil sands of Athabasca, northern Alberta, and therefore the Bureau d'Audience Publique rejected it, and the federal government as well rejected this. So that's a false statement. Also, operating costs are much lower in Russia. In Russia, natural gas does not come from tar sands, but there are more standard ways of extracting it.
Yeah, I have to interrupt because time is
C'est pour ça qu'on a de la difficulté avec nos projets de développement.
That's why we have trouble with our economic development projects, for that very reason.
See, please, for 2 minutes.
Ça.
Sure, thanks. I'll let Mr. Roche complete his thoughts there.
Écoutez,
Well, I was just interrupted, so it kind of it cut off my train of thought. Russian gas is much less expensive. Well, let's say the production costs is what I should have said. The market cost is the same, but the production cost is much lower in Russia when you compare it to what you find in Canada.
And is that historical with regards to that, or is it more recent with regards to those costs?
These are very recent figures. I looked at this especially over the last year and the year before. In terms of historic costs, I don't know. But one thing's for sure. Extraction in a tar sand context is the most highly polluting in the world.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Hoback.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses. I'm going to start off with Mr. Potonsky. One thing I was kind of curious about is when I was with Plexico and then Case New Holland, we were doing business in Ukraine, selling bar machinery, and I was actually in charge of the Ukrainian market for a small period of time. One of the big issues we had was getting currency out of the Ukraine and then getting EDC to actually back something. There'd be all this money allocated to the Ukraine. They'd say it'd be $60 million or $80 million, but whenever we tried to apply for it or utilize it, it just wasn't available for that project or this project. Has any of that improved in these days?
Well, certainly on EDC side, it has not improved, and that's why I keep on saying we got to do something with EDC where this does improve. On the transfer of funds from Ukraine to Canada, absolutely, there's no problem and no issues. Everything is done properly. Dividends are paid out to Canada. We have many members that do business in Ukraine and have transfer of funds without any problems. So that absolutely has improved. EDC, we have lots of work to do with them.
Okay. I'm going to go over to you, Mr. McMillan. Do you want to comment on what Mr. Roche has just said about Canadian natural gas?
Thank you for the opportunity. Unfortunately, I find Mr. Roche's comments very troubling. That he is comparing natural gas in Russia to Canadian Athabasca oil sands, and I believe I understand he was thinking that the natural gas that would be flowing through the Quebec facility would be coming from the Athabasca oil sands. If Mr. Roche had a role in that approval process, I think this is very troubling for Canada, because obviously no natural gas comes out of the oil sands that they produce petroleum, gasoline, and diesel fuel. Our natural gas comes from northeast British Columbia, from southern Alberta, but no relationship to the oil sands whatsoever. And the way he conflated those two is quite troubling.
The also comment that I would have is he was talking about the cost of production in Russia versus here in Canada. Now let's bring in the entire cost that we have here in Canada in regards to environmental review, the regulatory process, to make sure we have the best, safest, greenest natural gas in the world. How does that compare to Russia?
Totally. It's a matter of producing gas by drilling and developing a resource responsibly and producing it. We will compete head to head with anywhere in the world. Now, he is correct that Russia does not have high environmental and safety standards. They do not worry about the venting and flaring like Canada does. So if there is a premium for Canadian gas, it is only because of our high environmental standards.
Madam Chair, can I raise a point of order?
But we're happy to compete with anyone in the world.
An order?
I'm sorry, was there a...
I just want to remind everyone we're here to discuss Ukraine and Canada relate.
So actually, I'll tie it all together right now. When we looked at the Ukraine, and when I was doing business in Ukraine, we always looked for opportunities where Canadian companies could work with Ukrainian companies and export from both countries, taking components from both sides. Natural gas is a key component in a lot of the manufacturing processes of plastics and other items, and providing the power, a safer, greener power than, let's say, diesel. So that's where Canadian natural gas going into the Ukraine would be a lot cleaner and nicer for the environment than the stuff coming out of Russia. Plus, the geopolitical side of things, if Europe didn't have to rely on Russia for natural gas, Russia wouldn't have to be leaning on Ukraine to transfer that gas through the Ukraine into Europe. And that's really what's kind of in the background of what's going on here. So that's why the gas picture comes so relevant in this picture of a trade agreement. In regards to looking forward, and when we look at the opportunities in Ukraine with this new trade agreement, where do you see the most benefit? Where do you see the synergies happening? And maybe I'll go to you, Mr. Washchuk. What are the things that you identified when you're ambassador that you said, hey, we got a trade agreement, but we need to do better in this area, that area? And do you see those areas actually getting better? And I know EDC is a huge problem in regards to Ukraine. And I probably have no time to answer it.
You don't, but if you could possibly not give us too long an answer so that you can get the answer in, sir.
Okay. Actually, farm equipment and energy production equipment are among the leading areas where I think we, again, need to be way more aggressive. Ukrainian agriculture is booming. It is the world's third largest producer of wheat, fourth largest producer of corn, and the U.S. and Europe are cleaning our clocks on farm equipment supplies.
Thank you. Mr. Miao, please, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would like to address the following question to Mr. Mikhail Chishin on the modernization of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. But allow me, before I start, by expressing my sympathy for the Ukraine people here and abroad during this difficult situation. We have heard from the Global Affairs official earlier this week that the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement was always meant to be modernized, as a 2-year review clause was incorporated into the original agreement. How is the first free trade agreement perceived by your organization, and what would be the area of priority in its modernization?
Well, thank you for the question and for your expression of sympathy. It has been a very challenging and stressful time for people in the community here. I think we've seen, as has been noted, the success of the first challenges such as COVID and others notwithstanding. There is intense desire and interest from business people on both sides to grow and expand. There are many barriers and that this modernization process is a good one to identify the barriers and to think strategically about how to overcome them. Again, I won't go into details of our recommendations on our note, but there's certainly key sectors that stand out as the best examples, and I think many more to come. And focusing on the people-to-people ties, really allowing, as others have said, allowing Ukrainians to participate fully by being here once it's, again, safe to do so in a post-COVID environment.
Well, thank you. And we've heard from officials that trade between Canada and Ukraine grew, but also diversified following the entry into force of the agreement. What was the impact of that diversification for Canadian businesses, and what are the other sectors that could benefit from a stronger free trade agreement?
If that's a question for me, I'm not the trade expert who has all of those answers, but I know, for example, our organization has many responses and inquiries from, as I said, the cultural film co-production sector, the energy sector. Those are all the ones that are growing, and I'd be happy to turn it over to the chamber, who might have more detailed analysis on that.
Thank you. I think that one of the areas that we have tried working very hard with Alberta energy regulators to help Ukrainians modify some of the issues of licensing, of auctions, of the properties, and we have done a lot of work. Mr. Vasyuk knows of some of that work. The energy sector has changed quite a bit in Ukraine, and Ukraine has a lot of possibilities. Unfortunately, again, Russia occupied Crimea and took the best reserves of gas possible all around Crimea, because now they're saying this is all the territorial waters. But just in Ukraine, on the land of Ukraine, there are huge possibilities for natural gas, huge possibilities for oil. But again, we need to open and help the investors from Canada. And again, I can't forget the EDC with help of guarantees, with help of insurance, and we can do much more just in the energy sector. Ukraine can be a major exporter to European Union, and there's no really need to buy it from all over the world, because it's right there, but it's just not utilized and not worked on.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. On to Mr. Mize for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, thank you on behalf of my colleague who is having surgery today. So we wish him the best. If I could take the opportunity to allow Mr. Waschuk to elaborate further, because he only had a few seconds on the question from my colleague, Mr. Hoback, on the potential, the great potential for growth in trade on that farm equipment and energy production equipment. Just, I know you only had a few seconds. If you could elaborate further, I think that would be helpful as we look at the trade agreement.
Sure. I think if you look at the current there's been a shift to value-added stuff coming from Canada, which is, even stuff like Canadian processed pet foods are very popular in Ukraine. But I think helping Ukraine make more of its own resources, which Mr. Petitian was talking about, is key. Sometimes business cycles don't help. We had a major Canadian company partnering with Ukraine's state oil and gas company, but just at a time when natural gas prices in Europe cratered. So they ended up walking away because it didn't appear to make sense to them at the time. Right now, with prices where they are now, I think you're going to see renewed interest as soon as geopolitical risk declines. And again, on Ukraine is stereotypically known as a breadbasket, but it has nearly doubled its grains production over the last 20 years, and there's probably scope for another 50 to 80% increase in the next 10 years. So getting part of that action in terms of things like grain storage, logistics, port handling equipment, things where Canadian companies though again need that export financing to be competitive with their international peers in getting contracts. So those are definitely areas where I can see more being done.
Thank you. A question to Ihor from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, and I know that you spoke a little bit in your presentation about the EDC and the risk ranking system, and as well the Congress provided a submission to the public consultations on CUFTA that were done in March of 2020. So maybe you can elaborate a bit further on that risk rating system and how that can be reflected better to encourage Canadian investment in Ukraine.
I don't know the intricacies of it, but I know that this has been the biggest point of concern raised with us and with the Chamber and others, that the EDC process, again, prior to the current Russian escalation, was seemingly inexplicable, did not seem to respond to any of the market statistics that were being shown in terms of the kind of growth. Spoken many times to ministers, to EDC directly, seeking a clarity in how.
Rappel au règlement, Madame la Présidente. Qui empêche.
Call to order. The interpreter could not interpret as the sound was cutting in and out. Point of order.
If you could repeat your last couple of sentences, sir.
Sure. I was just saying that we have met many times with EDC to learn about how they make these risk assessments and have not had a satisfactory answer to how the calculations are made. And we would like more pressure put on them to explain themselves in terms of how they make these calculations.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Vice. Your time is up. Mr. Sheehan, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I didn't have an opportunity to just speak about the Ukrainian connection from Sault Ste. Marie in Northern Ontario, but I'll drill down to my particular riding when I didn't have enough time last time. That Sault Ste. Marie is one of very many similar communities across Canada where the Ukrainian population of people migrated to work at the steel mill well over 100 years ago. In 2017, the Ukrainian Church and Community Center celebrated its 100-year anniversary. And I remember speaking in Parliament, and I quoted a local news article, and it was called the church that pierogies built. And it really has been a very proud community. And if you look at Thunder Bay and other areas too as well, you can see a lot of that movement. So I'm talking about the people-to-people relationships that some people have talked about and how important they are in the industry. The steel plant is still here today, and Ukrainian people are still working here today. But the steel industry today is like, when you walk into a steel plant, it's like walking through a spaceship with a lot of nodes and computer industries. So there's also a lot of IT presence in Sault Ste. Marie, and we're seeing a lot of back and forth with people-to-people relationships. So one of the questions that I wanted to sort of drill down on is, how do we take advantage more of, these joint ventures, sharing of IT resources, people, and such. And I'll start with the Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce to first sort of really sort of like guide us on how we can take advantage of that.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Sheehan. First of all, it's nice that you mentioned that territory, because I know in that territory, Northern Ontario, Thunder Bay, Parry Sound, and these areas are actually getting some of the Ukrainian investors opening plants and in Ontario in that region. One of the ways that it happened, there was a person that came from Ukraine here many years ago and lived in Alberta, then moved to Thunder Bay and Parry Sound, and he took it onto him to actually approach these people. We worked with him just to help him with some contacts and stuff, but it's people to people contacts, people to people work. And again, I think that in the immigration area, we have to open much more. If we don't want to do a totally visa-free travel for everybody, somehow we have to look at business people. We have to look at people that want to come to Canada, see the territory, meet the people, shake their hand, discuss, and do the deals. Otherwise, it's very difficult to do business deals over Zoom and over telephone conversation. That's one area that we have to absolutely do. And again, when it comes to investing in Ukraine or doing some more business in Ukraine, what I'll bring is there's a great procurement contract portal called Prozoro in Ukraine, which is for basically procurement work in Ukraine. There are billions of dollars being put on that portal that everybody from across the world can bid on it. Very few Canadian companies are bidding. I mean, I hear of people winning 6 million, 2 million, 3 million contracts. There are contracts of hundreds of millions of dollars, infrastructure, huge contracts. And we're starting to work with Canadian Embassy to actually let companies in Canada, through Chamber of Commerce, through other connections, to let Canadian companies know that there's this huge opportunity. Yes, it's a little bit complicated. It's mainly in Ukrainian, but it's easy to translate to English, French, and help these companies work. So again, people-to-people contacts and more work on some of these ideas that are there, but not too many people know about them. We have to raise the awareness.
Thank you very much, sir. On to Monsieur Savard Tremblay for a minute and a half, please.
Merci. Alors,
Thank you. Mr. Rush, we saw how much you reacted in terms of your interventions, and I think it's good to have an enlightened debate. Now, I'd like to ask you something. You said earlier that, yes, this was trade, but it's good to push this agreement with Ukraine, this modernization of the agreement with Ukraine, but that trade should be mutually beneficial and shouldn't isolate any partner. Could you come back to that, please?
Ce que je veux dire, c'est que
What I meant is that, first of all, there was a study done by the Center for Economic and Business Research in the United States. And according to that study, the conflict will cost about $40 billion per year. So we're talking about $280 billion in 6 years. And that's far worse than what a lot of free trade agreements can bring in. So that's why I'm saying that we have to be able to resolve this conflict. Now, how? Well, we know that Russia is not suffering from the sanctions that have been imposed on it since 2014. One of the proofs of this is that it just got closer to China. Over the last 5 years, trade between Russia and China has doubled and today exceeds $145 billion. So that's why I'm saying, is that a good thing for us and for Ukraine that Russia is throwing itself closer and closer into the arms of China?
On to Mr. Massey for a minute and a half.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Real quick to Mr. Potonsi. With regards to the chamber activities, do you have a kind of a mentor program or a linkage program for, I guess, industries that are interested in working together?
Yes, we have a mentor program for students, university students. We do take them to work here at Chamber. We also line them up with companies that they're interested in. We have certain sectors that we have a specific person responsible for, so we can guide them to that person, and that person will help them in mentoring their work with specific companies within the area.
Are there any government programs that support this initiative, or is it just basically on your own? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Basically, we're doing all of this on our own. As Mr. Vasyuk mentioned, we were involved in CIIT, Canada-Ukraine Trade and Investment Support Project, which was sponsored by Canadian government. But this mentoring program and the things we do really here in Canada is all from the membership fees that we collect.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Patzer for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Waschuk, I think one question that we haven't really touched yet is what's going to be the impact of if there are any economic sanctions or trade sanctions imposed on Russia. What's going to happen to trade in the region? Is there risks? Is there benefits? What would that mean for this particular trade arrangement?
Right. One thing I'd flag is that, ironically, Ukraine is the country that's already been buffeted by indirect effects of what's been going on. For example, the government's had to pony up $600 million in an insurance fund because airlines were reluctant to fly into airspace because of the threat of conflict. So even though everybody's talking about sanctioning Russia, in fact, it's Ukraine that's been hit first by the indirect impacts. There is still trade between Russia and Ukraine. It is primarily in the energy sector. Ukraine has reduced its trade with Russia by about 3/4. A lot of that's been redirected to the European Union, with which they have a very active free trade agreement. So will Russia sanctions have an impact? They will, but not half the impact that Russia's overall sort of boa constrictor-like trade policy approach to Ukraine is having right now.
Okay, thank you. And then just if any of the other witnesses want to just comment quickly on the potential for upgrading and continuing to get more up-to-date farm equipment, but also farming practices to help tap into that growing potential that Ukraine has. I think that would be an important topic to further elaborate on if anybody wants to touch that one.
It doesn't look like anyone wants to touch the question.
Mr. Washuk, if you want to, or Mr. Potensny, if you wanted
to. Very briefly, sir.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have very similar arid land practices. We have sort of the introduction of no-till technologies into Ukraine would be extremely helpful in its southern regions. So, improving dairy production and processing techniques as well. Those are areas where we certainly could be helpful.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Raya for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is to Mr. Roman Washuk. Mr. Washuk, we heard quite a bit about the natural gas here. Outside the committee too, I hear people saying we have to cancel the new Nord Stream 2. And the same people also continue to say we should ban the entire Russian dependence on natural gas by Europe. And here we have witnesses saying Canadian gas is available to service Ukraine and Europe. And Mr. Potanchik says that Ukraine has got its own natural gas deposit that has to be developed. And my understanding is that Ukraine is earning a couple of $1 billion or more on the transfer of Russian natural gas through its territory to Europe. So tell me, what is feasible with respect to natural gas? In 5 to 10 years term, let's say not just 5 years, up to 10 years term, is it a practical thing to ban Russian gas because Ukraine is already earning money out of it? Or what do you say on all this natural gas talk?
Okay. One thing I'd note is that we shouldn't just get stuck on hydrocarbons. Ukraine also potentially, and Germany is very interested in this, could be a producer of hydrogen and use some of its current natural gas storage for hydrogen storage. It has among the largest gas of any kind storage capacities in Europe, to be a sort of a European hydrogen hub as well. So there are forward-looking technologies where Canadian companies could also become engaged, as well as in terms of natural gas as a transition fuel, given its lower carbon footprint than other hydrocarbons. I would say the priority should be on helping Ukraine develop its own domestic supplies. The Nord Stream 2 versus Ukraine discussion is one really where people will say Ukraine will lose transit revenues. Yes, it will. What it's more worried about is as soon as Nord Stream 2 goes on stream, Russia is free to attack basically the infrastructure in Ukraine because it no longer has to worry about cutting off its own revenue opportunities in selling gas to Europe. But focusing on improving Ukraine's domestic production and then already transitioning to a hydrogen and other alternative fuel future is probably the two areas where we can be most helpful. I am with Mr. McMillan on the potential of liquid natural gas, but let's face it, given Canadian infrastructure building tempos, that's not going to be on tap in the next 3 to 5 years.
And quickly,
50 seconds.
Okay, quickly, Mr. Oschak, I thought the trade between Ukraine and Canada will be much more compared to the people and people connection. We have got a very strong Ukrainian diaspora in Canada. With that, I would have expected to be trade to be much bigger than what it is now. What is hindering? In fact, somebody did mention that the trade before CUFTA was bigger than after CUFTA. I mean, what is hindering the trade between these two countries?
Partly it's because we make some of the same stuff. We are big temperate climate commodity producers, both of us. We're actually competitors in a number of areas, grains, for example, oil seeds. So the complementarities are more in the equipment and processing, and that is where we hobble ourselves by not having the export company support through EDC. Basically, you have at the moment the British, the French, the Americans coming in with hundreds of millions and billions in export financing, and Canadian companies telling the Ukrainians, please buy cash. That's not a sustainable basis for doing business anywhere.
Thank you very much. Let me say to all of our witnesses, know that the hearts and prayers of all of us are with Ukraine in this challenging time as they move forward. So thank you so much. Apologies again for starting the meeting late, but thank you so much for the valuable information. I will move adjournment of the meeting.
Thank you.